All right. Hello there, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to the PM Therapy Podcast. And today, I'm really excited about today's conversation because I'm going to be speaking um, with the head of PMO at Asana. His name is Steve. And I'm so excited because we're even having like a fascinating conversation before we went live.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll be able to, delve into a lot of that. But before we jump right in, I just want to introduce Steve. Steve, welcome. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, Steve, before we jump right in, could you introduce yourself to people that don't know who you are?
Yeah, happy to. Steve Smith, I'm the head of strategy and operations PMO here at Asana. And that purview extends across the CIO organization, so enterprise technology, traditional IT. In addition to that, I oversee our kind of overall enterprise objectives, key results process for Asana. And I'm also the executive in-house working on our PMO ICP with the product organization.
And when you say ICP, sorry, could you
ideal customer profile.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no worries. I spent my entire career, I call it the strategy and operations continuum because it's been a wide spectrum of things. I've got a strong consulting background. I'm actually an accountant by initial education and training. I did 2 or 3 different tours of duty with Deloitte in different capacities. Most recently, in addition to or before Asana, I was head of PMO at Lucid Motors. And before that, led the enterprise business transformation teams at Splunk. And there are a few different career kind of trajectories within and around that, but that's I think in a nutshell.
Yeah. So you started off as an accountant, and then
Yeah.
you somehow pivoted into project, program, strategy, and operations. How did that transition happen?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. You know, I started as an auditor, right, an accountant, and then went from there to becoming, I was a controller for one of the clients of Deloitte clients. And that's where I got involved with, we'll call it more traditional consulting teams, consulting engagements. And we were doing a software implementation. And so that is what was a trigger for me to kind of jump back into professional services, into that consulting capacity. And so I went back with Deloitte and did a lot of process improvement, system implementation. And that was really, I think, the introduction to a very structured approach and methodology around executing projects. And that was really, I think, the starting point for getting into kind of project portfolio management as an area of expertise or from a career perspective.
Hey there, just quickly, are you looking for a PM role? Have you been struggling in this insane, crazy job market? Well, if this sounds like you, we might be able to help you. We've helped lots of people land 100 to 300K PM roles. All you have to do is just click on the link below, answer some questions, and if we see that there's an initial fit, you will be invited to a free 30-minute call where we can further assess your job search goals and challenges. And if we see that we'll be able to help you, we would explain to you how we can do that and what the next steps will be. All right, then, back to the show. Nice. So you started out in a consulting space, and then you moved into sorry, I'm just looking at your profile, just trying to make sense. So you've done consulting, and Splunk is tech, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, exactly. Splunk is tech, and then you now moved into Lucid Motors, which is the automotive space, if I'm not mistaken, and then now you're in tech, which is PMO, right? Yeah. So those industries, a couple of so would you say you've sort of been doing execution, strategy, and operations across all those industries? Is that fair to say? Okay.
Yeah, in one capacity or another, yes, right. And I think that's, for me personally, it's been a great experience just because of just the breadth and depth of exposure to how different industries operate, kind of the thinking, some of the macro factors. So that's been super valuable. And I think the thing, regardless of specific subject matter, right? The thinking around portfolio management and project execution is still the same. It's just how you apply it is slightly different, certainly. But yeah, it's been interesting to be able to have to pivot and have to reapply. And it's been great because it reinforces, I think, the fundamental foundational principles that you find the ones that you want to adhere to, and you want to be part of your foundation, and then you pick up new ones along the way, as you get stretched and pulled in kind of different directions and different subject matter and different contexts.
Yeah, no, for sure. Hey, Greg. By the way, if you have any questions, please just leave them in the chat, and we will get to them. So, Greg, hey, thanks for giving a shout out to Steve. I assume that Smitty is also another name for you, Steve.
I can't see who's on. So
yeah, there was a comment that came on on the side.
Yeah, I know who that is. So
yeah. Nice. All right. So just going back. So you've sort of done execution and operations and strategy and operation across different industries.
Yeah.
Was it easy for you to transition, from one industry to the other? Did you find that, or did you find that you were maybe at some sort of disadvantage when you were moving from one industry to the other? How was that pivoting across multiple industries?
Yeah, no, I think it was. I think it's. It was a challenge, right? And it has been a challenge, right? And so I think like going from consulting into industry, into an internal, corporate role, that was, I think, the most significant challenge. Because when you're consulting, right, you're in a bit of a, you're in a bit of a bubble, right? Your sphere of control from a management and execution perspective is much smaller. When you move into an internal role, obviously that sphere gets a lot bigger, and there's a whole different set of considerations, and there's political things you got to manage, and it's just a different context. So the principles are the same. I want to have a structured approach. I have to think of the same things. Like there's things I got to be focused on, but the context gets much broader, and I think that's a significant change. Executing on a project team where you have very clear SOW, timeframes, expectations, deliverables is one thing. Deriving value and impact internally through a portfolio of efforts that are part-time, largely for a lot of the people that you're working with, entirely different environment. And in the end, the goal is the same, right? You want to deliver value for whatever the effort and cost has been input. But fundamentally, they're very different. So that was probably the biggest, I think, contextual challenge. And some industries, I think, are, in some environments, maybe it's not necessarily industry driven, but some environments are very different. Some environments value output, right? The work, the effort, and that's what they want to control, or that's what's valuable. Other environments value outcomes, right? Value that being delivered, right? Impact, not necessarily the method, the process, the standards to get there. And so I think it's about understanding what's recognized, acknowledged, valued, and then making sure you can operate within that, but then also looking at how can you extend and expand that thinking if it's not exactly what you might see as optimal.
Yeah. Okay. So let's drill down a bit. Do you have a playbook? Let's say, for example, now, you find yourself in another industry, a new industry that you're not familiar with.
Yeah.
What's your playbook in terms of getting up to speed and delivering value as soon as possible?
Well, I think, playbook might be for me, is not necessarily the right framing. What I've developed and employed over the years is a mental model, and it's something of a 3-circle Venn. And this is what I really employ to the people on my teams today, and that is, one circle is, look, we want to do the right things, right? That way we're focusing on outcome and value. And that might be different based upon where you are or what industry you're in or what have you. And it challenges the idea of we execute a run book, right? Because certain situations may require to do things differently. So the premise is I want to do the right things. Okay, great. The other overlapping, or the second overlapping circle is the concept of I want to do things the right way, right? And so whatever that standard might be, I want to be able to execute in a level of consistency and predictability, so I'm not reinventing the wheel each time. Okay, so if I'm doing the right things and doing things the right way, to me, that's going to allow me to be effective, right? I can deliver on commitments. Okay, so that's two of the circles. The third circle is doing things at scale, and that's always the hardest, right? How do I bring volume, into this? And so if I'm doing the right things and I'm doing those things at scale, now I'm being productive, right? So I'm optimizing velocity to a certain extent. If I'm doing the right things, doing things right, and then doing those things at scale, now I'm becoming efficient, right? I'm improving quality. If I try to have all three of those, intersect and overlap, this is where I'm delivering impact, right? So the focus for me, right, the approach for me is always making sure I'm doing the right things, making sure I'm doing those things the right way, doing them at scale, because my ultimate goal is to deliver impact, maximizing value generation. Now, I mean, that's not necessarily the traditional, 3 constraint issue with time, cost, quality, right? This is like 3-legged stool. I have to keep all 3 in balance, right? And the more balanced I am, the more value that I can deliver. So it's more of a mental model, run a mental model playbook versus a tactical playbook. And then you can apply that in any industry. You can apply that in any circumstance. It can be engineering focused, product focused. It can be enterprise technology focused, right? It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. No, I like that, because a lot of times you hear this word just thrown out there, or impact. I just want to deliver. But yeah, what does that really mean? So I like that, that breakdown, do the right things, do it the right way, and then do it at scale. Now, is there an order to these?
Well, I think for me, I think the thing is do the right things, and that's probably what I emphasize the most is don't just blindly follow a run book. Just don't blindly follow a process. If there's a better way to do it, if there's a quicker path, or again, a unique path we haven't thought. I mean, just do the right things, right? And sometimes you don't have to do every step along the way, right? It's okay. And that's where it just challenge people to think. Don't just act, right? Just don't follow a process. It's not a check the box. Find out what the right things are, and then really focus on them. Might be different each time, and that's okay, right? But just find the right things. Make sure you mentally understand, justify your decisioning, right? And then go execute. I'd rather talk to someone about how they made a decision and the conclusions that they came to versus the check the box that you did something, right, because it was on a list. To me, that's non-value add, right? People grow when you're challenging how they think, right? How they apply, how they reason. And so that's where my focus has always been.
Yeah. And it's very tempting to just act, because there's that rush you get when you cross off things from your to-do list, right? So it's very tempting to just, go.
Yeah.
And it's very uncomfortable to do nothing,
that's hard, right? Because again, sometimes you got to slow down to move faster, but the urge is to just go do, right? The urge is to check something off. And, said differently, it's outcome versus output. Output is irrelevant. Outcomes are what's important.
Yeah. If you don't mind, can we double click here? So let's say you're in a new industry, or you're working with a team, and that first circle is do the right thing. How would you find out what the right thing is? Like, could you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can use an example, right? If you are charged with, hey, go create a PMO from scratch because we don't have one, right? Like, where do you start, right? And I think, one of the, like, do the right thing. I think you might think, oh my gosh, so I have to go. The best thing is that, what are all the projects, right? And I got to make sure I can control the body of work. The right thing in my mind is, what's valuable and important to the leaders of the organization, right? I'd want to understand, again, what's valuable and important, right? I'd want to understand how are they making decisions. I'd want to understand, what does success look like? Okay, the tactics to get there, are irrelevant. That's one example. Another example might be, I have a run book where I need to do a very, the steps are project charter, project, roles, responsibilities. I get into, defining, an impact assessment. I mean, if you're just checking off the boxes, if I know that I'm having this particular piece of work that is highly valuable, but I already know that it's really going to impact like one team very specifically, like, do I need to do a formal comprehensive impact assessment if I know right away that that's not required? No, right? If I've got a very, that's just one example, right? But so I guess the focus here is just like, just don't blindly do things, right? To execute. Understand what success looks like in the organization. Understand what's valuable from a leadership perspective, right? And then really think about, what is the trade-off of effort versus value of what might be prescribed or perceived as, like, the normal steps of execution.
Yeah. And have you had situations where even leadership finds it difficult to identify what's important and valuable to them?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most common thing that you come across is, the leader, especially like, even now, right? When we look at from an enterprise technology team and in Splunk, working with the business transformation teams, it was, you've got a business leader that is like, this is super important to our success. Okay. How do you know? It just is. How do we know? What does success look like? It's super valuable. I mean, you get into these non-virtuous discussions of, it's really important, and you're trying to get justification. I think that's just kind of the biggest challenge. And what I generally try to do is help, and you can employ, some simplistic benefit frameworks of a traditional balanced scorecard. Like, is there, do you have hard or soft, financial? Yeah. Do you have, customer impacts? How are you measuring that? Do you have, again, can you convert that to hard or soft, financial information? Okay, great. Operationally, those are probably the lower ones where it's efficiency, and productivity, because those things are hard to quantify, or at least really realize value. You get into employee impact. And so, I think the biggest thing is that, when when leaders are struggling with quantifying, if you start to break it down into those kind of different components and break it into, how are you measuring the business, and then how can we, correlate what we're doing to impacting a lever, and how does that lever drive, there's a process to kind of work them through that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I've worked with that in the past.
Nice. And do you see this as the responsibility of the leader of a PMO? Like, this is incumbent upon them to drive this level of clarity?
Yeah, I think, I know there's a couple of different schools of thought on that, right? And industries are different. There are some schools of thought of, hey, whatever the business tells us is top priority, we execute. And our job is to maximize and optimize the resourcing that we have to execute. Another school of thought is like, no, we got to think about the organization as a whole and make sure that we're, our efforts are involved in driving the most value and impact of the organization, right? I think my point of view is it's both, right? And I firmly believe that that PMO organizations, wherever they may sit and however they, are manifested within the organization, right? We own the process, right? And the first step of the process is making sure that all the efforts, whether from the business side, right, from a technology team side, or wherever it may be, like all the efforts are aligned to the things that are going to drive the most value to the organization, right? And so, that's sort of very critical thinking around, do we have a very clear business case? Do we know exactly how, or, there's correlation and causation. And so let's not get too far into that, but what impact do you want to drive, right? And how, not only do we know that we're done with the work, but what does success look like? How are we going to measure that value, right? And I think those things are just very important. And oftentimes, in that kind of, rush of urgency, right? It's so easy to skip past that and then define that. Oh, we'll define that later. Like, no, you've got to put it up front.
Yeah.
And then after that, that's where you get into, and the reason that's so important is that once you define it up front, it's so much easier to then have both sides of that equation maximize their own resourcing. So if the business commits to an outcome, a value realization, the technology teams also understand and commit to that. Now both sides have an equal share in how they, their accountability to delivering that outcome, right? The business has to have the resourcing, the processes, the enablement, whatever it might be. On the technology side, now I'm going to make sure that I can deliver with my resource stack, right? The component that is going to be necessary to drive that with the business to realize that value, right?
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I mean, there's a lot we can still unpack there. So this is the first circle, do the right, make sure you're doing the right thing. The second circle, do it the right way. How do you ensure that?
Yeah, and I think that's just a matter of, and that's more of a tactical element, right? Because the focus is look, I want to make sure that, we have consistency and predictability, right? And ultimately it's about quality of output and to a certain degree, getting, a higher degree of confidence in that. And that is like, look, that's the importance of standards. That's the importance of documented methods, and let's not reinvent the wheel each time, right? If we're going to do things like, it's simple project templates, right? Like, how do we do that, right? And this is simple. You have tools like Asana that and others that's critical, right? When I spin up a project and it's this type of project, there's a way that I do it. I don't have to recreate the wheel each time. If I'm going to do a change management impact assessment, I got to have a standard that enables everyone, whether it's on my team or some other team, right, to execute along that. That predictability of outcome, that predictability of content is super important because it eliminates leadership fatigue, right? Switching costs for leaders that are seeing things done differently, communicated differently, executed differently is massive. And in an organization like Asana, right, the amount of switching that already goes on for some of our leaders is excessive. And then you throw in the executional projects that you're trying to massively change an organization. And now I've got a different construct here, a different construct there. It's overwhelming, right? So that consistency and predictability of outcome, output, information is incredibly valuable.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And then the third bucket. So now we've tackled the first two. The third bucket or circle. So how do you now?
Well, the third bucket about volume is really a byproduct of the first two, right? If I've been able to develop the muscle of thinking about doing the right things, right? Clearly, I'm not wasting time on things that are non-valuable, right? If I'm doing them the right way, I'm also saving time, right? By not having to reinvent the wheel. So volume then, or doing things at scale, by natural, my productivity improves. I got higher quality. I'm not doing things again and again and again, right? And so that velocity improves. And that's how you get to be, extending individuals to a wider scope of work. I mean, every industry is a little bit different, obviously. I think in software and tech, a lot of times the project and program managers are stretched across multiple efforts simultaneously. They're multi-threading. And that's really, we talk about doing things at scale, is like, how do I scale people across a wider, broader portfolio of work? And, they have the flexibility of determining what is important, doing the right things. They know, and they have the confidence in delivering things the same way each time with predictability and consistency. It just helps them. It helps extend them over a wider swath of work. So the third one really is kind of more of a byproduct of the first two.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
makes sense. Okay,
yeah.
So I think this now leads us to a natural segue, which is, let's layer in AI. I see a lot of people in the comments are, talking about AI. So let me just highlight this from Curtis. It says, what are your thoughts about using AI across the PMO to drive efficiency and to drive outcomes and value?
Yeah, there's two things there that we are currently doing today, right here at Asana. This is what I think is super interesting and exciting. Like one of the things that we're doing, you think about traditional intake process, right? And there's a lot of triaging. There's a lot of effort to massage intake requests to get to a certain point, and that's where we are leveraging AI heavily, right? And so for us, we're doing that to assess the quality of assessments or submissions, defining the framework of what does good look like, not only from a completeness perspective, but from a quality of business cases and ROIs and what have you. And that's where it can really drive value, because it eliminates so much of the kind of the busy work. Now, the challenge there is those things are continually learning, right? And you have to evolve a lot of the background content that they're referring to, but that's a good thing, right? It just takes some time to optimize that, but that's a good thing. The second piece that I think is a more challenging piece is, you think about PMO operations, right? We are facilitating the process, we're facilitating the methods and the standards. And you talk about, how do I get visibility into areas where perhaps I am not operating effectively, right? I am not utilizing standards the right way. I am not leveraging work we've done before. And that's where I think that's the bigger challenge, but I think that's a big opportunity, is having agents that can look across portfolios and say, hey, I'm not seeing, RAID logs completed for this portfolio of work, or I'm seeing, this particular project or these projects don't have the consistent set of milestones that we've prescribed as our method and our standard, and I think that's the other part. And so what that does is it focuses the people that are within the PMO operations. Again, they're focusing on, how am I interacting with people to guide in the right direction, versus more of that quality control, traffic cops sort of construct. So it's far more value add versus what might be considered more administrative.
All right. Just as a follow-up to that question, now, if people are thinking, because a lot of people are nervous about AI, right?
Yeah.
And AI is coming, and it seems like it's eating up some of these things. So what would you say that people should, like, how should people react to that? How should they handle that? And maybe what are some of the tasks that maybe they should do less of, and maybe what should they do more of?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one for I think for all of us. And we were talking before, we got live. It may be very different industry to industry, right? More highly regulated industries may have a different impact than, perhaps pure tech, right? I think the thing that I would focus on is, again, the importance of understanding the why why we are doing something, the importance of interpreting interpreting the results of some of these AI agents and the bots, right? It's not about the mechanics of processing. It is, what do we do with the information? The decisioning element, I think, is what's most important. And I think this is also a challenge where if you're earlier in your career or have less experience in this field, a lot of us have gained, the knowledge and experience from making mistakes in the past, from project experiences, right? And we apply that today in terms of how we interpret the information that we receive coming out of the AI agents, the bots and what have you. We use that to have the right conversations, right? To continue to kind of push our stakeholders in the right direction. Getting to that point is where I think people should focus, is that how do I use the information, right? How do I use it to drive more value? How do I use it to make better decisions? But that's going to be the tough part. Because if you don't have the experience of making those decisions without that, how do you make the decisions with that? Right. And I think that's just the challenge, right? But I think just at a high level, it's not, I think it's less about how do I get AI to create an outcome. It's more about or create an output. I think it's more about how do I use that output? And that's where people should focus on. How do I use that to create more value? How do I use that for conversations with leaders? How do I use that to ensure that my team is operating more efficiently and effectively, right? And that's just the challenge.
Yeah, and it reminds me of this. I was listening to this Stanford professor. I don't remember his name now, but and one thing he mentioned is that a lot of people are using AI not in the right way, right? Because many of us treat it as a tool. All right, I ask you this and spit out something.
Yeah.
But you should treat it more like a teammate and a thought partner, where it's like, okay, you tell it, all right, I want to do this. Ask me relevant questions until you have enough, and then propose a solution, right? So it's almost like you're asking the AI to probe and to ask you the questions that it needs, so that it can give you a very, very particular, thoughtful, customized solution. And I think that really changes, like, number one, the what you're going to get from the AI, and also I think it really has the ability to really transform your work, right? And just one example that he gave was, I think he was working with the national parks, and there were all these employees, and this person, like, there was this very boring, annoying paperwork task that they needed to do that would take them 3 days. And just with this person, without any coding experience, this person was just interacting with the AI, and the person was able to save like that task that would take 3 days, it now went down to minutes, basically. So, like, the national park system in the US, I think they saved about 7,000 days across the entire US, right? But it just goes, it's like, it's how are you, like, interacting with the AI? And I think, just to finish up with this, I think one of the things that I really got from that was, what do you really hate the most about your current job? Just, what is mundane? What do you really hate? And then, have that discussion with AI. Okay, like, I want to optimize this, and then let it ask you questions, and then you'll be surprised at what could come from that.
Yeah. I think there's a really very practical use case, right? And this is, I think, is something that Asana does really well. And that is, how can you use AI to greatly reduce the time, effort, energy associated with providing, status updates, either at an individual or portfolio level to your business stakeholders, right? And so, what we've done is we've moved away from individual program project steering committees to, we just have portfolio reviews with leaders across their entire portfolio. And we've been able to do that because we utilize AI Studio, part of our own product, and have AI cull through all the work in a portfolio to craft, right, our updates. And we give it very specific, guidance. around, you want to focus on accomplishments, highlights, lowlights, what's next, the important things. What are some things, where's places where we need your help and decisions, right? And that may seem very simple, but the power of it is immense, because what do we hate doing?
Yeah.
Having the pre-meeting to discuss a deck or a slide, multiple reviews, back and forth, all the energy to do that, right? And so now we can have the AI agent do that. And so you bypass the prep meeting for the meeting. You bypass the prep meeting to look at the materials that you're going to discuss during the prep meeting and so you can greatly reduce that overhead, because no one likes doing that, right? It is probably the most the least value add, investment of time. And now you can use that to do 90% of the prep work, right? And then that way the person is, again, it's a great example of, I'm using that output. Now, how do I use that output? It's never perfect. And I have to go through, understand, make sure I'm crafting the right messaging, making sure I'm emphasizing the right points based upon understanding the culture, the environment, the needs of my stakeholder. And so 90% of that effort is gone. So now I can take that output, craft it, and use that for those conversations.
Yeah.
Now, you got to make sure all the inputs are right. If you're not doing it the right way at the lowest level, there's a challenge there. And so it's a process to hone that. But once you hone it, we've been able to eliminate all individual program project steering committees, right? We've been able to reduce the amount of time that executives spend on individual, projects, that are important to them. We've been combining it into, monthly 30 to 45 minute discussions. And the discussion is not reviewing a slide. The discussion is not, reviewing, a narrative. That we create is presented, it's created, it's prepared, sent in advance. Our discussions are now substantive business issue conversations. So the work is necessary, but it's almost becoming irrelevant. And I think that's like the biggest shift, is that AI is making the work is necessary, but the work output is almost irrelevant. It's table stakes. It is just the absolute bare minimum to get to having these meaty, important conversations. And that's probably the biggest change, the biggest kind of shift. And to your original question, eliminate all that junk to get to those conversations, which is super valuable.
And as you say that, because I'm just reflecting back in my career, like a lot of, in certain cases, that is all the PM does.
Yeah.
It's like, so that's a bit uncomfortable if that's all you do, because it's not easy. Like, you're basically herding cats, as I say, like you're herding cats, you get, and then you pin this narrative, and, like you mentioned, it's the meeting before the meeting, ensure that everybody's prepped, aligned, and then, so now if all of that is going to be taken away by AI, then
yeah, but I think that's the opportunity, right? I think if you want to succeed in this field, right, the opportunity is not just being the skilled labor, right? The opportunity is, how do I interpret? How can I use that output and be able to communicate, weave a story around the three horizons of work, the stuff happening right now today that we got to manage tactically, that midterm horizon of things we're trying to drive to, maybe this quarter, next quarter, and that horizon way out there, which is more of my planning and backlog grooming of what am I trying to get to out there in the future. The ability to communicate across those three horizons effectively and have your value associated with that versus work output, that is the massive opportunity to succeed, I think, in the new world of PMO in the future. It is not about the work. Work is necessary, but it's becoming irrelevant. Right. How am I driving value? How am I aligning what we're doing to the needs of the organization now, next, and later? That's the really important part.
Yeah. I know this sounds like a cliche, but it's really, how can you help them execute on their strategy better, right? Because there's a lot of work needs to happen, but if you're outsourcing that to technology, and then you're more focused, I guess, more forward focused, right?
Yeah. What are we doing? For whom? By when? What's the value? How does it align? We're doing the right things the right way with the right people. I mean, that's the mantra that I use. It's the mantra that I've learned from a former coworker of mine, and Curtis, who asked that question, knows who I'm talking about. But yeah, what are we doing? For whom? By when? What's the value? How does it align? Right people doing the right things the right way to deliver that value.
Yeah. Nice. And this ties in with what we just talked about. So
Yeah.
Theophilus asked, question beyond proficiency, what are the soft skills you think PMs should have to be successful in this evolving PM world?
Two things. And I don't know if they necessarily qualify as soft skills, but you need to be what I refer to as leadership empathy. And that is not necessarily, it's about how can I understand the world, the needs, the desires from my partner, my leader's perspective. And I think that is just how do you get out of your own view, get out of your own situation, think of the problems and think of what solutions needed from their perspective, right? So that's kind of challenging to get outside of your own comfort zone, number one. Number two is storytelling, right? Is how do I communicate at the right level, right? With the right start and finish, right? If anyone's been looking, for a job recently, it's like telling your star stories, right? It's like my situation, tactics, actions, and results. I mean, how do I tell a story? Talking about what you did is irrelevant. Talking about the work that has been done is irrelevant. How do I tell a story about the value I'm providing from the perspective of the leader I'm supporting?
Right. Steve, I want to go back to the challenge that you mentioned. I know we have, a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I see, because I work with other people, and some people are not PMs on my team, and we use AI heavily, right? But when AI gives me something, because of my experience, I'm able to say, okay, no, this is garbage. You're hallucinating here. And, I'm able to even further probe and challenge AI.
Yeah.
But for people that are not as experienced, they could be misled, Any thoughts or advice on how people handle that if you don't have that level of experience?
I think, I think that's a very real challenge, right? I think my only advice is it's kind of like, the old woodworkers challenge, like measure twice, cut once, right? I mean, so, you might want to think about, it's just don't take the first pass answer, as correct. Think about continually growing, evolving the library of prompts, right, that you're using. That might be a little too prescriptive, but I think the simplest answer is measure twice, cut once. And trust but verify, another analogy. And it may feel like it's going slower at the start, and you may feel like productivity is decreasing. But I think with anything, you just got to get through that kind of valley of despair, and then before you get to the growth curve, and take the time, right, to perhaps move slower, trust and verify. And then as you gain confidence kind of in the outputs and the ability to control outputs, I mean, and that may not be super helpful, but but that's a very real challenge. I mean, I can totally see that.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think I agree with all what you said. The one thing I would add is just mentorship. Like you really just connect with somebody who's been there, done that. Because I don't know if that would ever be replaced, but I mean, I could be wrong, but because the thing about it, like it so confidently spits out BS sometimes, like, it seems so convincing and you can easily be swayed by that. So you need to be able to think critically, sometimes.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. I think it's a great point, right? I mean, maybe that's something else to really lean into is, as I mentioned at the start, right? I think people that are earlier in experience in this field, that can be really hard given the shift and transition where we are, right now. And yeah, I mean, learning from people that have been through these things before, seen lots of different things, have got the lumps, the bumps, the scars, right? I think that's super valuable.
Yeah. Would you be able to share some, I guess I want to look forward, would you be able to share some exciting things coming up with AI in your world? Or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned a couple of them, right? I think, we've just, I think Asana in general, has done very well in our AI studio, which is our, kind of our AI agent, has been very, very, very well received. We just announced, we've got some growing lists of pre-built workflows and kind of pre-built applications, right, for different use cases and scenarios. And so as those libraries of things start to evolve, and I think that's something else that could help assuage some of those concerns around the output is really interesting. Leveraging what other people are doing for specific use cases. I think that's super exciting. From a product perspective, I think that's very exciting. Internally, and again, I'm very excited about how we are. I think we're really pushing the boundaries of not only from an intake perspective, like really streamlining the portfolio side of things, of how do we assess, triage, evaluate, and prioritize in a very quantitative and a very objective manner. I think that's really, really, really interesting, and it's going to be one of those things that's going to be very powerful for people, because we'll be able to package that and it'll be native to the product. And that's the other part that I get excited about, is that things that we're doing here, and not only do we do it to evolve and advance and optimize kind of what we are delivering for our own internal business partners, it makes its way into the product, right? Yeah. And so that's really interesting, is that we're informing the product. And the second part, which I think is far more challenging, right, is that part around how do I build and how do I bring agentic AI, right? So agent construct into that traditional portfolio analyst, portfolio QA role of assessing, how we're meeting standards, what is the fidelity of some of the work, where do I have potential, health issues. And that's another thing that we've just started looking at, and that is not the idea of project health. Health is not red, yellow, green. I can have a watermelon status all day long, right? It's again, are we doing the right things the right way? And that is very subjective. And so getting an AI agent that has a rule book of health, best practices, standards, mental models, methods, and having that do an overlay of work to give you that kind of Z-axis or third dimension, of status. To me, that's really, really, really interesting and progressive. And I don't know of anyone else doing it, and so I'm very excited about that.
Nice. I know we're already over time. Do you have a few more minutes, or do you need to drop off now?
I do. I have a few minutes. So if there's,
you want to do lightning round?
Yeah,
Steve?
absolutely.
All right. Agile, waterfall, hybrid.
None of the above. Nimble.
I knew you were
just hybrid, but yeah.
Yeah. Biggest pet peeve in meetings.
The biggest pet peeve in meetings is the meeting for the meeting that's about the meeting that you're going to have. So no doubt.
Fair.
Yeah.
What's the most important question to ask during the project kickoff?
Why are we doing this? I mean, nice. in a very specific way. What is the business case? What is the value? How do we know? How's it calculated? Right? Do we have certainty around? Not that's what success looks like. No, that's executional. What does success from a value impact look like? If we don't know that, we don't start.
Yeah. Which is worse, a meeting with no agenda or a presentation with 100 slides?
Presentation with 100 slides.
Okay. If you could fire one meeting from your calendar forever, which one would it be?
Well, I've already mentioned that a few times. Any prep meeting just needs to
All
go.
right. Fair
Yeah.
enough. Fair enough.
Any prep meeting just needs to go.
All right. One final one.
Yeah.
Would you rather get an email marked urgent at 4:59 p.m. on a Friday, or an Asana ticket with no description?
I think the email marked urgent, I definitely could do without.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Also, all right, Steve, this was fun. Thank you so much for coming. If people want to connect with you after this, how can they do that?
Yeah, I think the best way is just message me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to, and I've had conversations with people, coffee. I mean, whatever. Happy to connect, happy to help, and it's probably the best way.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Steve. I really enjoyed the conversation. And
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you all. Yeah, take care. See you. Bye.
Bye.